Hello, tonalists. Here we are at Illustrator again, and we're getting to the end of the semester. And this project that we're going to do is going to look into the nuances of creating creative gradients and patterns, and how to use those to give your picture a lot more light and atmosphere. So I'm going to start showing you a few key tricks, and we'll go from there. Okay, in this next part, I'm going to show you how to use gradients to adjust your artwork and some tricks. So right here we have some artwork I created, and we are going to fill it in. You've been shown how to use the blob brush, and I'm going to show you how to basically just create layers and fill stuff in. So first, we're going to create a new layer, and we're going to call it chair. You have to double click on that, chair, and then say OK, and we're going to put that below this first layer because it's the color. And so I'm going to say chair color, and say OK. And we're then going to click on our pencil tool, and we're going to draw the shape of the chair back in here. So you can do this in numerous ways. Sometimes I like to draw the sections of the chair so you can have a little more control. Take your time and make sure you kind of go into the black line a little bit, and that'll save you some time later on if you're trying to clean up the edges. Okay, so I had my fill on, so it automatically did the fill once it was on, but if the fill had been off, it would have just been a line around like this. So anyways, I have all these different gradients I've created, and this one particularly for the chair. So I have this new little layer for that one, and I'm going to do, before I get going, I'm going to duplicate this layer. So you open it up to get this path, and we're going to then duplicate this path, so we have two paths here, and you'll see why I'm doing this later. And then I'm going to, before I go on further, I'm going to trace the back of the chair on here, create a new line around the whole back here. Then you're going to duplicate this one, and you'll see what I'm doing pretty soon. And we have two versions of each of these, right? So the one on the top, I'm going to turn into a pattern. And so I'm going to go back to my fill, and I'm going to find a pattern. And the one way to find patterns is to go to patterns under swatches, and you can go to basic textures. These are neat because all they are is the black lines, and so if you pick different textures, you can fill them with different kinds of fill. There was a cool, that was pretty subtle. So anyways, you can play around, find something that looks interesting to you and works with what you're working on. And once you get something you like, I think I'm going to go with that one looks fun. Okay, once you get something you like, you can click over here, and you can then click on this, and it will automatically go, if you close this, it'll go to the one that's the top one, because that's the easiest one for it to touch. So if you didn't want to choose the top one, you could close your top one, and when you click on this, it will go to the one that doesn't have the eyeball on it. So that's a good trick to remember. So anyways, we're gonna change the top one, and You can, if you have a pattern somewhere you love, you can use your eyedropper tool by pushing I and click on that, and it will just instantly fill it in to the other spot. So that's a good trick. Okay, I'm going to show you really quickly one of the really powerful presets that Illustrator has in it. Let's say you want to try to do some skin tones. You can use your pencil, you trace the shapes that you want to fill, and you create a layer like I have here with all these different different areas. Like these are his hands and that's his face. And so when you get that layer, you want to make sure it's below the drawing unless you want to cover up the drawing. So we're going to open that up, and let's just start with the face. You select it, you targeted it, and then we're going to go to fill. And if you go to your libraries and you go to your gradients, there are, under the gradients, you go to skin tones, and there's all these different skin tones you can choose from to have different kinds of skin colors. Whatever your character needs or wants. Let's pick something kind of pinkish here. That's pretty dark. I want a little. Well, okay. So, anyways, let's say we pick this one, and then we can click on this one, and you could use your eyedropper tool if you wanted, and you could just transfer it over, and then you click on this one here, activate it that way, and eyedropper, we'll pop it in that way. Okay, there we go. So let's say we want to change the gradient, the way it works. Let's click on this particular part of his face, and you click on your gradient tool. You see how it's going across this way? If I go like this, I can make the light kind of hit the front of his face and create the shadow behind him more. And I can do the same thing with this one by taking the gradient tool and then just dragging the direction I want the light to hit. In this case, it works because if you look, this is darker, lighter, and most light. And the same is true with this other side. That's the beauty of this method, is it's really quick and easy to color in things. So let's go back to getting the whole picture. So there you have it. Some pretty quick, easy tools. You could also add other layers to the skin to kind of get a little, some subtle other shading if you want. I'm going to show you one last trick using the rectangle tool. And like down here, this was kind of messed up, and so I'm going to just show you how to like make a better, straighter line here. So I'm going to change my fill to something different. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to use the eyedropper tool, right? Use my classic eyedropper tool by pushing I, and I'm going to change it to this color right here. So that eyedropper trick is big. So we're gonna get that, and I am then going to zoom in so you can see what's going on, and I am going to use my little direct selection tool to then kind of move these down, double click on it, and then move it down. Then what I can do once I've got these kind of made, I can then play with the anchor point tool to kind of bow out these edges, give them a little more rounding style. And I'm going to bow this in a little bit. There we go. Nice. Okay. Sometimes the biggest battle is making sure you're clicked on the part you need to be on. So there we go. We have a little more nuance to that area. And on to the next part. I'll show you a little bit about some techniques I use to make this little curtain with windows and hanger thing for the background. There's a lot of layers here. So what you want to do is you want to make sure you keep track of things. Like if, for instance, I use my pencil tool and I draw the basic shape of the whole curtain, that's a good way to begin because you can kind of get a main color on there. And you can see my swatches have just lots of colors that have been built up over time by working on this project. If you want to, you can save all of this stuff. You can be like save swatches, and you can name it something like I did here, and you can save. And that gives you a bunch of stuff to work with. So once you get a big shape like this, what's fun to do is actually then get a rectangle tool and start adding the actual folds to the curtain by actually making these little rectangles. And you can see how just because there's a gradient on the rectangle, it immediately creates kind of a gradient, like a fold effect. And if I were to do another rectangle right here, you see that shape of that one underneath gets covered up. But if I take my opacity down a little bit, I can see through that. And then let's zoom in a little bit here for you guys. I can see where this fold disappears, and I can actually take this and I can drag one of these by double clicking on it into that spot there. So that way that fold gets tucked in kind of. And if I want to go here, I can use my anchor point tool here to kind of make a curve here and push out to kind of balloon out that curve. And I can also, if I want to, add an anchor point anywhere along this line. Like if I want to add one right here, that'll help me be able to then adjust this point here to kind of like billow out a little bit more here, and adjust this point down here to kind of like get that curve going. Maybe pull this one in, and I can always create a curve by pulling that little circling thing in. So you can see like immediately I've started to kind of create some more interesting curves with this. If I click on this one, I can do the same thing here. Click this back in, tuck it in, maybe use the add anchor point tool to kind of smush this, give it a little curvature to it. I can give a little curvature down to the bottom to get that kind of nice bottom thing. Okay, so now I'm going to show you a little bit about how to create a curtain rod, and this will show you a little bit about how to create gradients in strokes. Okay, we're going to once again get that rectangle tool, which is a really important tool. I've been using tons. So once you get that done, you can then click off of it and select it, and that gives you the ability to go in and start playing with the fill. And we're going to go down here and go to gradients, and we're going to go to metals. And you can see there's different kinds of metals here that you can click on and select. We want to be over here on the fill, not the stroke. And so you have to make sure you're on the one you're editing. And so that's the bronze. And I ended up really thinking for this particular thing, the pewter worked for me. So we'll go with that one and close that out. If you want to edit your stroke, which we actually were doing accidentally, sometimes that's really tricky to get to. So just make sure you've got it clicked on there, and we're going to stick with, we'll make it look different. We'll do a two-tone. And then you can go to edit gradient. And sometimes you got to kind of click around to get it to show up. And see, we've got the stroke as this kind of a gradient. And if you zoom in, you can kind of see how that color works. I can apply the gradient along the stroke. I'm going to make the stroke a little bigger for you to really see what happens, which then kind of looks a certain way, and I can apply it across the the stroke. And so that's a really tight little gradient that's going to go, down or whatever across the stroke. And a lot of times you can't really, it makes it look a lot more beveled. Like if I were to then click on these corners here, you can kind of really see it. It just gets that kind of cool beveled look. I want to put this shape, the pole shape, in its own layer, because if, for instance, I want the pole to be behind the drapes, I need to have it below the drapes, and that way when I drag it back there, it'll actually end up behind it, which is kind of a nice thing to do. So anyway, make sure when you're creating these things that you create these whole little layers for them. One of the things with the drapes, for instance, if I want to move all these drapes at once, by clicking on this, it automatically selects everything and I can just kind of drag them around. Actually, what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to use Option and I'm going to actually drag a copy of it to the other side. Oops. Option. And when you drag, you have to release the mouse first or it will just disappear, just so you know. So I've got another copy on their side, and these are pretty exact, but if I go click on it and say Object Reflect, Transform Reflect, I can change the angle of it and then play with it from there. So that's a quick way to get two drapes super fast, and then you can start to kind of like click on parts of it and drag it down, or change it around and start to make it a little different. Let's change the color of that one. So that way you can begin to kind of like really design this the way you want it. Finally, when you've played around with this and done all the hours of adjusting things and everything, you get to the point where you've dragged all your different objects into your room or whatever space you're creating or whatever thing you're creating. I want to show you one last thing, and that's how to create more atmosphere to your pieces. And I'm going to show you this by just basically taking these two layers off. And you can see without those layers, basically I've got a little gradient underneath the TV, but there's not much shadow happening. There's the gradients, all the individual gradients of everything on the walls and stuff, but overall not much. So what I've done is to create a rectangle over the entire piece, and by doing that you just basically use your rectangle tool. And let's get over here. Oh, and you can't, yeah. So I'm going to just do a whole new layer here, because if these are not active, you won't be able to draw on them. You have to have them visible in order to do your rectangle on it. So we're going to just do this as a test. And I'll call it test just to be fun. And I'm going to take my rectangle tool and draw over the entire picture. And it happens to have a gradient on it already, which is kind of interesting. Okay, so with this gradient, I'm going to go over the entire thing. You can see it's a global gradient that's kind of has a single point of light in the middle, which works really well with the window here. So if I were to, let's undo this, if I were to click on my little gradient tool, and you can see what would happen if I make the light come from the window, which is pretty cool. I can also then change how this comes about by clicking on opacity, and I can say, oh, I just want it to multiply. So it'll only show it by darkening things. And I can also say, I just want a more subtle version of that. Just let's take it down to 60%, or wherever. I can change. I can do other things. I could have it just darken. And you can see the difference between darken and multiply. They're just slightly different. Color burn, it can be really harsh, and some cool things that you get with that screen, Anyway, let's stick with multiply for now and keep it pretty subtle. And you can do this in layers, which is kind of cool. So I can kind of use this to, let's play around with this light here. If I squeeze this together, it's more funneled and focused. And I can also then move this so it just shoots on him more. So it can be kind of like, wow. Let's do another glorious full scale layer here. And I'm going to actually, before doing this, I'm going to create another layer. And I'm not going to name it right now. I'm just going to draw a huge rectangle around the whole thing. And instead of using this particular one, I am going to edit my gradient, and I'm going to call it a freeform gradient. And I am going to change the opacity to just be multiplied so I can see things better. And these little spots, you can bring them into different areas. So I could like click on this and drag it over here to the window, and that's going to brighten up the window there. And I can actually drag this out a little bit and kind of make that window get brighter. I can take this spot and I can make this get brighter too by just clicking on this and pumping up the light here and saying okay. And so that'll be kind of like the lamp. I can darken this one. And I can just pick this over here and maybe make that a little more subtle. Let's take it over to here and say okay, a little less intense. Anyway, you get the idea. I can kind of like move these into different positions according to how I want the light to work in the room. I can add a new one. Like if I want to add a new one here, I can make this one like pure white, and that'll just really brighten up this window area. So, if I wanted to, I could put these behind the TV or something like that, or I could put it like right in the TV, just to get that TV getting brighter. Add several of them there. Let's stretch this out. And then, once I'm all good with these, I can then work on the opacity of it, take it down a notch so it's not such a strong adjustment. And you can do lots of layers of these things and kind of slowly basically like glaze your piece down so that it gets all these different kinds of light going in it. So play around with this stuff, and you really notice that you're able to create a lot more atmosphere just with using the gradients to kind of like fill things in, and playing around with these patterns to give the furniture and the clothing and the things a lot more nuance than previously. So have fun, and we'll see what you can do with all this.